Hello, welcome to Lutheran Witness Podcast. I'm your host, Roy Askins. Today we are coming to you from Rome, here in Italy. Before we dive into this wonderful interview we have lined up for you, I want to give a quick shout out to our podcast partners, kfuo.org, Christ for You, anytime, anywhere. Check them out, kfuo.org. Today we have a very special guest, Reverend Tyler McMiller, who is an LCMS missionary based in Italy. How are you doing, Tyler?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for this opportunity.
We are very glad to have you with us and here to tell us about the work that's going on in Italy. We have a special event that we're here to record and to gather the story of. But before we do that, I want a little bit of a history, Tyler, about the work of the Lutheran Church here in Italy. How did this all get started? Just kind of short. We have some articles on this in the Reporter and in Engage, so we'll link those in the show notes. But just a quick summary for us, Tyler, to let folks know how the work began here.
Well, it began, it's hard to say what year it began, but it began very, very small with a few contacts here, mainly in Padova, where we have a house church today, with a seminarian named Luis Lange, who is studying to be a pastor. It grew from there just through different contacts through the internet, especially during COVID when everyone was stuck indoors. Everyone fled to the internet to find answers to the troubles they were dealing with, and that allowed the gospel to shine very brightly. From there, we were in contact with two other men named Joshua Salas and Lorenzo Muroni, who are now finishing their studies at Luther Academy Riga, and they will be celebrating their ordination on Saturday. They, through different means of outreach, especially through the internet, put me in contact with so many people across the peninsula. And right now my work is very much taken up by establishing house churches and visiting small families across the peninsula with word and sacrament.
That sounds incredible, Tyler. What was it about? Was there anything, obviously COVID was difficult for everybody, had lots of effects, kind of across the world, obviously. Was there something particular about COVID that kind of drove this interest in the Lutheran Church and what we were saying?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think it goes back to the theology of the cross and the theology of suffering and how we do preach Christ crucified, and how firmly and how strongly we as Lutherans understand that we have a God who understands our suffering. And, COVID obviously was a long time ago now, at least it feels like it, but that's the continuous message that we're working here to proclaim to people. Obviously, a lot of people immigrate to Italy from Latin America, even from partner churches, and things don't go quite as well as they had anticipated. And that's a large theme of many people that I'm in contact with, and the understanding of a God who suffers with us and knows our suffering and gives us the forgiveness of sins and eternal life through his own death and resurrection, I think, is a message that resounds in all difficulties.
I'm interested in this idea of also, I think you're spot on. I was unaware of this immigration to Italy, largely from Latin America. What's behind that?
Well, yeah, that's given a great boost to our work here. I did grow up in Latin America. My father was a pastor for 15 years, pastor missionary in Latin America for 15 years. So I grew up speaking Spanish, and my wife is from the Dominican Republic. So in our own neighborhood, we are in contact with a lot of Hispanic people who are not familiar with the Lutheran Church. However, as we look at the map of the peninsula, many of the people that are contacting us out of the blue are people from Brazil, from Chile, from Venezuela, who are coming to Italy to make Italy their home. And they have lifelong Lutheran members, and they're a bit shocked that there's only one Lutheran pastor in the whole country. Praise be to God, in a couple of days that will be improved significantly. All the same, it presents quite the challenge, but it has given a great boost to the work here as we seek to establish house churches across the peninsula.
Mm-hmm. We'll get to the house churches here in a minute. You mentioned, God willing, in a couple of days, there's going to be a few more hands to help with the work. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, right now we are here for this theological conference, a conference in ordination, and on Saturday morning we have two great seminarians, Seminarian Joshua Salas and Seminarian Lorenzo Muroni, who will be ordained. And we give thanks to God for that. They both come from different Protestant churches who unfortunately have very much followed the spirit of the world on all sorts of themes, especially sexual themes. And they were looking for a serious church that took the Word of God seriously and yet understood, the means of grace, baptism, and the Lord's Supper. And thanks be to God for so many podcasts and YouTube videos and so many pastors who dedicate so many hours of their ministry to that. They did find the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod.
And that was largely through podcasts like, I want to say, was it Fisk and Wolfmuller and some of these guys?
Jonathan Fisk, Brian Wolfmuller, Jordan Cooper, of course.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
And many people who contact me have had their first exposure to Lutheranism through those great online theologians, as I like to affectionately call them.
I have to be honest, I'm always a little hesitant about them. I mean, just and nothing against these guys. They do great work. Here, of course, we are, this is like we were talking about, critiquing books while you're writing a book, critiquing books. And here I'm on a podcast, critiquing podcasts. But I've always been a little bit hesitant about them simply because it's so easy to kind of build a following and these type of things. And if you're not directing people to actual churches and congregations to hear the Word of God, people can become distracted from the central means of grace there in the gathering of the saints on Sunday morning and during the week. And it's just great to hear that these young men were able to hear this and then seek out where they find the means of grace in person.
Yeah, I think all three of them would certainly agree that their step is just the first step of, God willing, getting them into an actual a congregation or even a house church where there is the Word of God being preached regularly and the Lord's Supper being distributed frequently. And obviously, that's a great challenge for us here in Italy. But it's the first step. It's the first step. And everyone has their own first step towards becoming a Christian. And especially with the Lutheran Church, becoming a Lutheran, confessional Lutheran.
Let's talk about the work in Italy predominantly and what's going on here. And you've mentioned a couple of times house churches. Help our audience understand what a house church means in Italy.
Yeah, so I mentioned the work in Padova. Padova is a mid-sized city in northern Italy. And for many, many years, that work was really oriented around a current seminarian at our online Luther Academy out of Riga, Latvia, named Luis Lange. And for many years, there was a Romanian pastor who would come to his house and give him the Lord's Supper. And of course, the attempts were made to reach out to more people, and many of those were successful, but not every month. But, there was one person, and that's how it started. Today, we have a very nice house church there with a great potential, especially as we look to Seminarian Luis Lange's future ordination. The work in Rome also started in my living room. Even today, we still do every Thursday night at 5:30. We do a Bible study in my living room. Thankfully, at this point, we have moved to be doing Word and Sacrament in a church that is located in downtown Rome by the Pantheon. So that is not a house church, and we are very, very thankful for that. But in Florence, which is, of course, a city north of Rome, south of Padova, there is a house church there, and we have five individual Lutherans of 5 different family groups that gather there for Word and Sacrament. We just celebrated 2 of their confirmations in the last month or 2. So that was a great blessing. So that house church has really grown, starting from one person. And, I always thought of Romanian Pastor Soren Friffa, when he would fly to Italy for one person. And, I simply have a train ride to Florence. And for many months, it was simply to one person. And now we're up to 5. And 2 of those people from that house church are here at our theological conference today. In southern Italy, there's a family that I visit regularly in their living room in a small town called San Giovanni Rotondo. They're from Brazil. And I visit them regularly. And there's an American family who is here at this conference who has attempted many times to make that trip to San Giovanni Rotondo to be with us. So we have 4 people.
That's phenomenal.
That's great.
Yeah. When you talk, maybe help people understand when you talk house church versus congregation.
Yeah.
What's kind of, I don't want to say dividing line. Like how are you using those terms? Or maybe they're just flexible because this one's meeting in a house and that one's actually a congregation or church building.
I think that's how it is classified in my brain. But it's very, I always go back to Acts 28 where Paul was renting a house in Rome and receiving everyone with all boldness and confidence. And I always attach that. And, I think regardless the importance of, and I mentioned the loneliness of the people here in Italy, especially immigrants. And with myself speaking Spanish, my wife speaking Spanish, we are in contact with a lot of very lonely people here in Italy. What they're searching for is a family. And I love that concept of the church as a family, and whether, a church needs to be a home where we have God the Father and Jesus as our brother, and we eat together, which is, of course, the Lord's Supper. We are born again in baptism. I think about that a lot. And I think about that family aspect. And, of course, it's beautiful to have a congregation, but the importance of it being a Christian family and a congregation, I think, is really important.
And I'm assuming that helps assuage some of the loneliness that they're dealing with when they're coming in. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, we have this Thursday night Bible study at 5:30, and maybe only 30 minutes of it is actually
Conversation and consolation.
Study.
Yeah.
And then sometimes it'll really get out of control. And then I say, well, let's have a hymn and a prayer. Okay. But it's conversation, and it's being together and enjoying God's gifts together and enjoying friendship and love and Christian friendship and love, which is really the purest form of those gifts that we get from Christ himself.
So what other types of ways of reaching out and kind of engaging in the community? So you have, this Bible study in your home. How else are you engaging with the community and kind of letting people know that Lutherans are here and what we preach?
That's great. We've already talked about YouTube and things like that. The internet is a tool, and the more I invest on the internet, the more people I get in contact with. So I do spend a lot of time with our Facebook page, with the different YouTube channels. I already mentioned the Thursday night Bible study. Of course, those people are just people that I know in the community. The house churches scattered across the peninsula are because these people knew about Lutheranism before they contacted me. Either they are immigrating from the U.S., Latin America, and they want to still be Lutheran, or they're finding out about Lutheranism through reading, their study, and different YouTube theologians. I mentioned the Thursday Bible study, but another initiative that I began was a study in Italian on the Augsburg Confession, and I did that for I did that for about 3 months, and I took a good pause, and then I did it for another 3 months. And that was brutal. The Italian was so difficult, and I just felt, and it was so late. Originally, it was supposed to be 7:30, but then everyone said, no, I could never do it at 7:30. It has to be 8. I was like, okay, 8 p.m. All right. And then it got pushed back to 8:30.
Well, this is Italian culture, though.
Yeah,
too, right?
and I'm not a night person. So, but that got me in contact with so many people, and I'm still in contact with a lot of those people. But one of those men who I found out was really close to a house church outside of Milan in a smaller city called Piacenza, where there's a Chilean Lutheran family. He actually lives in Piacenza. He started attending that, and now he's here at this conference, and we're almost done with his catechesis. So
that's wonderful.
Yeah, and it was,
And so there was like an online YouTube class or something you were doing?
It was a Zoom class, and I just worked so hard on it, and it was so late. But I thought it would be a colossal failure. And the first 3 months, a lot of people came. Then I took that pause, which I just had to do for sanity. And then, the second time around, less people came. But, we'll see about it in the summer.
Yeah.
But the fruits of that are very palpable with this man and then I asked him, well, where do you live? And he said, well, I live in this small town south of Milan. I'm like, well, where? And he said, Piacenza. I was like, well, gee, I go there every other month.
That's great.
Yeah.
So how long has he been catechesis now?
Well, we were, if you include the Augsburg Confession study as catechesis, it was
sure.
I think that counts. Well, how can't you,
Yeah,
and
right.
that's what I said. I was like, well, we're going to talk about the Lord's Supper. He said, well, we already talked about that. And I said, well, you're right. In the Augsburg Confession, we certainly did. So we went through it pretty quick. But it's been about 3 months plus 2 months of actual confirmation.
That's great.
Yeah, it's long, and it's one-on-one. I do all my catechesis one-on-one mainly because I can. Mainly because that's a luxury I can afford. And then I try to bring them together, merge them, and then they don't want to. And I'm like, well, all right.
But talk about a great being able to build, I don't want to say, it kind of is expectations of pastoral care and
I know.
what you should, what their, in some sense, relationship toward you as pastor and what your, as the overseer of their souls, responsible for their care, that helps build those relationships. I think it's really kind of a neat way of doing it.
And I think obviously the flip side of not doing it that way is that you're building it with the community, with the other people that they're studying the catechism with, which I think is beautiful. And then seeing it, inviting longstanding members to participate in the confirmation, in the catechism class with new members. I think that's beautiful. But yeah, you're absolutely right. It's a lot of, I think it's just the reality of it when you have people that are not used to Lutheranism, that they don't know the Lutheran Church, they're going to, a lot of it's unfortunately, and also fortunately, it's going to be about your personal relationship with them. I think that has to be recognized. And of course, you want it to be about doctrine. You want it to be about our confession. You want it to be about the gospel. But yeah, I don't know.
You're a human being.
I'm
right?
a human being.
They're going to connect with you, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's part of I think you're totally right.
It's just this balance and stuff.
Oh, very cool.
Thank
you. Mentioned, so is it Padova or Padua?
Yeah, well, in Italian, it's Padova.
Okay. So.
And in English, it's Padua.
Okay. So the reason I ask is I was just speaking with somebody in the hallway, a missionary in Africa, right? Can we talk about this publicly?
Yeah.
Can we? So he's going to be helping you here in Padua.
We're working on it. We're working
Hopefully.
on it. It's going to be a long road. I had a long road myself with my visa.
So the reason he's not here yet is visa issues.
Yeah,
correct?
It's just brutal. The bureaucracy. There was a year and a half when my family for a year and a half, my family could only be in Italy for 3 months at a time. So 3 months here, 3 months gone, 3 months here, 3 months gone. And I was just running around the bureaucracy looking for documents. And he's starting that process. Now his wife has citizenship, so that's great. But there's still a lot of bureaucracy even there. It's going to be, but we're praying for that. And obviously I know what to do, but the number one thing to do is to wait. It'll be better now. I was in the worst time because in some ways COVID was still a factor when I arrived in 2022. Then there was the Ukrainian refugee crisis. That was still a factor. And all those refugees got priority to anyone else, which is legitimate. But and so we don't have those factors anymore. But it's still a lot.
Yeah. Well, it will be also when it finally does work out, if Lord willing it does work out, it'll be nice to have an extra hand.
It absolutely
there
will be.
As well.
It absolutely will be.
How do you expect with these 3 new pastors? I was going to say young, but not all of them are young. So we have 2 young ones, one more middle-aged gentleman.
Yeah.
How do you expect this will affect the work you're able to do and the work going on here in is it the Confessional Lutheran Church in Italy
Of Italy.
Of Italy.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's
always, we never know, is it in or of when we're doing this?
We don't have many documents where that's written, by the way.
So how do you expect having these new pastors will affect the work that you're able to do and where you can go from here?
Yeah, obviously that's a great question. That's a question that we've been really talking about for the past year with these guys, with these young men. Two of them are obviously young men. And as we look to this weekend, it'll be Joshua and Lorenzo's ordination. Luis is it'll be at a later date. But the reality of the work is it's this humbling reality of so many pastors in Italy, so many Protestant pastors in Italy, and even now in Europe is the reality of being bivocational.
Mm-hmm.
So they all three are well prepared to be bivocational pastors, and that's been a conversation from the very beginning. That's very humbling for me to think about the privilege and the honor I've been given by the church to not have to do that. And yet bivocational simply means you have two vocations, and we as Lutherans have a great doctrine of vocation. So it's not necessarily a negative, and God can certainly make that into a positive, especially as we seek to reach out to people and build contacts. So Joshua and Lorenzo, future pastors, Joshua and Lorenzo will be looking to be the pastors of the downtown church in Rome. And that will be, there will be two of them it's a small church, but it will be a lot of work because they will both be working. There's the opportunity for them to be helping a lot and receiving compensation for all sorts of translations and things like that. But it's simply the reality, and it's a reality that's not unfamiliar to Protestant pastors in Italy. That will certainly allow me to travel more. That will also allow me to focus more on my Thursday night Bible study group and those contacts. And I live pretty far outside of Rome. And the church, our downtown church, is very downtown. And so I'm looking at the possibility of starting more with that group and maybe working to a weekend service with them. But it's tough, they're not used to going to church every week. So it'll be interesting, but I think we're going to have a good run at it.
Cool.
I'm more optimistic about that than I was with the Thursday Bible study when I started, and with that Augsburg Confession study that I thought was going to be a colossal waste of time and was not. It was a huge blessing to so many people. So we'll see. And Luis also, in Padova, that will be a huge possibility because the mission in Padova is very interesting. We have a lot of immigrants from mainly Brazil, a few from Germany, who travel very long distances to that mission in Padova. And with him being ordained, and if with the arrival of the Stephenson family, being able to have weekly Lord's Supper there would be a huge, huge blessing for those people who are making that a very, very long trip.
So, how far are they coming? What are we talking? 4 or 5 hours? 10 hours?
Yeah. One way.
Wow.
Yeah, there's a family that drives from Milan. That's got to be 6 hours.
It's incredible.
By car.
So we were recently, Erik Lunsford and I were recently in Madrid working with recording the work that Isaac Machado and Allison Hinn pastors and Alliance Missionary pastors in Spain are doing.
Yeah.
And what's amazing is just simply the amount of time they spend on the road going from place to place caring for what might seem like small congregations, but like you said, what starts out as one people before you know it is 4 or 5, and then it grows from there.
Well, we as the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, we have this tradition of the circuit rider, and that's how the church started in the Midwest, with one guy on a horse running around and chasing down Lutheran. And it's very well documented, that history also in Brazil and in Argentina.
Mm-hmm.
And
Incredible. As you look toward the future of the work here in Italy, we're not in Spain now, we're in Italy.
Yeah.
What do you see as kind of the future of what's going on here?
I'm worried about the work becoming more and more spread out as I invest more in internet and becoming so spread out. That's going to be a real challenge. And one of the things I do to kind of filter, I know this sounds bad, but to work through how serious people are, is I do an online service of the word Sunday morning, because we don't have access to a church Sunday morning. And my rule is if you attend that regularly, that means you're not going anywhere else to church on Sunday morning. So that means I'll come to you and give you the Lord's Supper. But becoming more and more spread out is going to be very difficult as we get a website, which we almost have. We had a member who had studied that, as a software engineer, and he designed our website. It's almost ready. So that will put me in contact with a lot of people. But that's one facet of the work, and the other facet of the work is getting in contact with people in my community. It's one of these big misconceptions of that Italy is a Catholic country, that everyone here is a Christian. Look at all the churches. I mean, in my neighborhood, I've met a lot of people. I've met most of the people in my apartment complex. It's about 50 unit. I don't think any of them I don't want to generalize, but I don't know any that go to church regularly. And by regular, I would say a couple times a year. Like really,
Wow.
like they don't. I mean, they just don't. I mean, they'll go to a confirmation and things like that if someone can confirm me. Very, very, very few go regularly. And I would put that bar pretty low. So it's a real challenge. It's a challenge thinking about getting a group of those people. Many of them, I remember when I taught for my Thursday night Bible study group, I taught the story of the prodigal son. And that Thursday we had a nice group, and none of them knew the story. None of them knew the story of the prodigal son. And there's an 80-year-old man who's Italian who attends. And when the son has that unbelievable line where he says, "I will return to my father's house and say, make me a servant,"
Mm-hmm.
He slammed his fist on the table. He's like, "This is such a good story." I was like, "Why?" And he's like, "Oh, this brat, he's going to get it. He's going to get it good. He's going to get it so good." And I was like, "Yeah, keep going." He's like, "Yeah, kids these days, they don't know anything and all this stuff, I know these kids, my daughters are married to I was like, "Oh my goodness." And he was just unbelievably shocked by the end of the story. He was so shocked he couldn't say anything. He was literally, he had nothing to say. And he just kind of walked out. And thankfully I saw him the next day and we talked a little bit, but he was still in shock. And then he kept coming, of course. And I kept referencing the story, but it was such a shock to him. Just so overwhelmed by grace.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a huge step to him, as if any of us do, but understanding the gospel and really wrapping his brain around it. Mm. But I mean, it's just such a basic story for someone who is Italian, who had been catechized, who would go to his kids' baptisms and his grandkids' baptisms and confirmation. Really, really, really sobering. So yeah.
Lots of opportunity. Is there I don't know how to say this other than just to kind of come out and say, is there kind of a callousness to hearing the word of God because you're so surrounded? I mean,
Yeah.
One of Erik and I's first impression of Rome when we came last time was, the buildings are religious, right? Like the roads are religious. Everything is, so much is wrapped up around the papacy and the Vatican. Is there a callousness that's really hard to kind of get through sometimes?
Yeah, they're very jaded. They're very burned by the Roman Catholic Church. There's a couple neighbors who have come to my Thursday night Bible study, but do refuse to come because they just say, "Listen, I don't believe in that stuff." And because they're just I think they're just overwhelmed by the corruption and the wealth and the history. I mean, they know the history. They know what pushed the Reformation, what caused the Reformation. I mean, they were victims of that too.
Mm-hmm.
Luther says, "Oh, the Italians are stealing all all our gold, but it's like, yeah, the Italians are like, well, we're under this. So we're all in this together, but they had no option. So obviously that's a generalization, but it's true. I mean, they also feel burned by it. And they were so close. So yeah, it's a callousness, like you said. They're very jaded. And most of the people who come to my Thursday night Bible study are not Italians. They're not Italians. They're Hispanics who are looking for friends.
So do you teach in Spanish or do you teach in Italian?
No, so that's a hilarious thing. So in the United States of America, Hispanics have a hard time learning English. Just do. And that makes Hispanic outreach very difficult. But in Italy, they understand my Bible study in Italian. So we do it all in Italian. There are a handful of Italians that are there, especially that older couple are always there. So we do it in Italian. Everything's in Italian. And then the older couple, they always leave first. And then everything switches to Spanish. And it's sometimes that's very difficult for me to switch over, especially so quickly. It's not for them. It's not for my wife. But yeah.
That's interesting. You've mentioned a couple of times inviting people to your Bible study. This is going to sound like a basic question, but how do you do that? And I'm thinking here of people in the U.S. always afraid to invite somebody to church, always afraid to invite somebody to pastor's Bible study. Like literally, how do you invite somebody to your Bible study here in Italy?
That's such an important question, and I'm still figuring it out. I always make this point that I think it's easier to invite someone to a Bible study than divine service.
Why is that?
I mean, even in Italy, where you're like, well, everyone's Catholic. Well, first of all, I mean, if they were to come to my divine service, I wouldn't give them the Lord's Supper because they're not confirmed. And that's a little bit offensive. And I understand it's offensive. The gospel is offensive. And it is a little offensive to invite somebody to your house and then say you can't eat. I mean, let's just be honest. I mean, and again, I'm a closed community guy, but it's like, I see it in their eyes. They're kind of taken aback. Yep. So I'm like,
I totally agree with you, actually. I'm going to interrupt here.
Please.
And when I was in the parish, I told a couple of pastors were somewhat scandalized when I said, I don't invite people to church. I invite them to instruction and study that when they come to the divine service, they're not shocked. I was in Texas. It was a bunch of Baptists, and we're going to do things that they don't get and they don't understand, and it's going to be immediately offensive to them. And they're going to run away.
I know.
So I invite them to instruction, and then when they go through instruction, they understand it. Then they're totally dedicated to it because they're like, I understand what you're doing first.
Well, this is the catechumenate. So this is one of these words get thrown around, the catechumenate. Then we have like in the early church that people got kicked out of the divine service for when the Lord's Supper had. Well, why? Well, yeah, because they were closed communion. Well, also because they're not going to get it. They need to be taken down a path. And I totally agree with your line. It's so funny that you said that. I've said that many times. I don't invite people to church. I invite them to Bible study. And I think having a Bible study as an outreach is really important. How do I invite people to that? Well, a year and a half ago, we had a big Christmas party, and we invited a bunch of our neighbors to this Christmas party, and we knocked on their doors, brought them stuff, and they came to the Christmas party, and we obviously told the Christmas story, read it from Luke 2. And then I kept doing it. I did that for about 2 months, but my Italian was really rough. And I was like, I said, yeah, that was fun. I think we're done. Well, that was good. That we gave it a good run. Thanks for coming. And they were kind of done too, to be honest. But then I started up with that same group, and a lot of those people did return, and new people came. I mean, again, it's a lot of, so Thursdays, I spend a lot of my day just walking around on Thursday leading up to the Bible study, trying to run into people that I know.
Mm-hmm.
And wearing my clerical, especially on Thursdays, making a point of that and inviting them to it. And people who might not know I'm a pastor, but know me in the community.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, that's a big part of it. I mean, I got 2 daughters. I got a 4-year-old and a 6-year-old. We obviously we're like, hey, come over and play. We do this Bible study thing. We'll get pizza. It's like casual, but we always say, it's not like a bait and switch, but it's very casual.
Mm-hmm.
It really is.
Mm-hmm.
But it's about all they can handle, And
Well, and like you said, there's probably that family aspect is what kind of helps when they've visited a few times, kind of this idea of the family, and helps keep people engaged.
And the people are very lonely. The people that we're with are very lonely.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, you know how the Jehovah's Witnesses do outreach? They literally say, it's like on their flyers, they're like free Bible study. Like, who charges for a Bible study, man? I was like, well, I didn't know I could charge for this. But that's their thing. And
so
it's
like that's how they do it here in Italy, or is that like in the U.S.
I've seen that
too?
in Latin America too. I don't know about in the U.S. I've never seen any of them in the U.S. But in Latin America and in Italy, that's like the top of their thing. The thing with the flyers, it says free Bible studies. I'm like, my gosh. And they don't know anything about the Bible. Who would want to learn the Bible from them? Sorry. And like that I know anything, but I think I know a little bit more than I don't know. Yeah. But anyway, that's just me being arrogant. But it's true. I mean, it's like a free Bible study. It's like, but people do like studying the Bible. I think that's something that we need to know.
Mm-hmm.
People do like talking about the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
They really do. Mm-hmm. Divine service is tough though, but you need to learn to appreciate it. And that takes time, and it takes trust in the pastor. Yeah.
Free Bible studies. I love that approach. That's phenomenal.
So funny.
We should just start advertising free Bible studies in the U.S. See what happens.
I love it.
Is part of that the character of folks in Latin America and Italy that they enjoy this? But let me say, maybe you don't have enough experience with this. I don't know. Mm-hmm. But how would you compare like folks in the U.S. versus folks in Italy and Latin America in terms of their interest in talking about the Bible?
Well, that's very funny. That's very true. I think there is like this idea that in Italy, I think it is like they're jaded, but they want to know more. It's what you said. They're jaded, but they want to know more. So they're looking at this and they say, well, how do I understand this church? And that's what's so cool about it. And Seminarian Lorenzo brought it up in his presentation. And I mean, I've talked about the churches here in Rome. And obviously this isn't in the Bible that Paul was martyred, but we know that he was, and he talks about it prophetically. And that's a huge opportunity. I mean, I'm like, that church over there, that's where Paul was martyred. He was beheaded for confessing Christ. I mean, you can do a Bible study just on that. It's very palpable for them. There is that opportunity to make those connections, that they see the churches. I've thought about doing this, and I didn't really, but like printing big pieces of artwork of different churches here in Rome and like teaching that for the Bible study. I thought that would be I thought it'd be a cool idea.
Yeah.
It'd be kind of expensive.
What can folks in the U.S. do to support the work here in Italy, or what should they be aware of? Anything you want to say back to those folks back stateside who are probably listening to this?
Well, I think it's really, really fun to talk about the work in Italy. So I appreciate this opportunity. Please keep the Confessional Lutheran Church of Italy in your prayers. Please pray for our 3 seminarians, Joshua, Lorenzo, and Luis. Pray for the people that I'm in contact with. Pray that this Thursday Bible study group of 15, 20 people that I'm in regular contact with, that become more than just a Bible study, but become word and sacrament for the salvation of their souls. I would love to get your email. If you could email me, I could share my newsletters and keep you updated on the work so that you could be aware of what to pray for. And of course, there's also my prayer card with more information on the work and how to partner. And that's the thing. I mean, everyone always, how does the church propel the preaching of the gospel? It's through the offerings of the saints. I mean, there's no other way. To the partnership of the saints across the world who are supporting this with the gifts that God has given them. There's no other way that the church is able to do anything. So I invite you to partner with me, with your support, with your offerings, financially, of course, with prayer. And I would love to be in continuous communication with you through newsletters on what Christ is doing here.
And of course, for all of you listening, we will have links in the show notes to Pastor McMiller's email address and all sorts of links to stories that we've told already about the work in Italy and ongoing work as well. So thank you very much, Pastor McMiller, for your time here. It's greatly appreciated.
Thank you so much.
And thank you to all of you who are listening to Lutheran Witness Podcast and learning how, even in Italy, to interpret the world through a Lutheran perspective.